My name is Peter Newman. I'm director of ICSR, and I'm going to be moderating the event today. For those of you who've never been to an ICSR event, they are always exactly 1 hour. They are no longer than an hour, and we have some drinks and some nibbles afterwards, so that's a good enough reason to sort of be patient and stay on. So what we're doing today is we're launching the latest ICSR report, which is called Al-Shabaab's Western Media Strategies. So if you want to sit in the first row. Okay. And I want to begin by introducing the speakers, but also by saying what this report is not about. It's not about the civil war in Somalia, and it's not principally about the situation of Somali diasporas in the West. Those are important things that need to be understood and analyzed and researched. One cannot understand, for example, the group Al-Shabaab without looking at the history of the civil war in Somalia. And one cannot understand the civil war in Somalia without looking at diaspora dynamics. But that's not mainly what the report is about. What we were interested in was something far more specific. So our starting point was that we found that for a number of years now, Somalia has become an attractive destination for so-called foreign fighters. Young Muslims who come from Britain, from America, from Western Europe, who go to places in the Muslim world to fight what they believe to be jihad. And it's estimated that since 2007, 1,300 Western Europeans, North Americans, have gone to Somalia to join Al-Shabaab. 1,300 Westerners, 1,000 of whom are ethnic Somalis who live in the West. But interestingly, 300 were non-ethnic Somalis. They had no family connection to Somalia. They didn't know anyone in Somalia. They didn't have a stake in that particular conflict. Now, what's the reason for that? There are plenty of reasons to explain why that would have happened. Invasion of Somalia by Ethiopia, African Union forces, more recently the involvement of Kenya, the fact that Al-Shabaab has become closer and closer aligned to Al-Qaeda, to the point where earlier this year the group has formally declared its affiliation with Al-Qaeda. But another interesting aspect, and the one that our report is talking about, is the very aggressive recruitment that Al-Shabaab has conducted over the past few years. Arguably, Al-Shabaab has become one of the most prolific, most active Al-Qaeda-affiliated groups on the internet. They're putting out lots of material. 6 or 7 years ago, you had mentioned Al-Shabaab. If you'd gone into extremist internet forums, if you'd gone into YouTube, you would have barely found anything about Al-Shabaab. Now the forums, YouTube, are full of this stuff. And the point of this report is to find out what exactly is Al-Shabaab doing, what kind of media products are they producing, what media are they using, what exactly are they putting out there, how do they try to appeal to young Muslims in Western countries, and what is the sort of overarching strategy behind all of this. And that's what the report is about. It's about the Western media strategy of Al-Shabaab. And over the past 6 months, these two guys here, and James Sheehan, who is also an author but who is in the United States right now, they have gone through literally thousands of videos, online forum threads, Twitter feeds, etc., and have tried to make sense of the sort of overarching principles that have driven all of these media and propaganda activities. And that's what they will be talking about today. Each one of them is going to talk for about 10 minutes, and then we have about half an hour of discussion left. So Alex is going to make the start. This is Alex Meleagrou-Hitchens, by the way.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, everyone, for coming. I should just start out by saying probably that recruitment of Westerners by Shabaab it's very different, really, from the recruitment of Somalis and other East Africans. With the latter, money and tribal or clan affiliation play a much more significant role, whereas with the former, not so much. By analyzing the media output of this organization, we're looking at what Shabaab identifies as the pull factors for potential Western recruits. And we like to look at it as a case study of how jihadist organizations look to attract Westerners. We divide the report between ideological materials and more pure propaganda materials produced by the group, and I will focus on the latter, while Shiraz will look at the ideological stuff a bit more. Like a number of the Al-Qaeda affiliates, Al-Shabaab has recognized the importance of establishing alternatives to the mainstream media. It's pursued this alternative media strategy by producing English language videos presented as documentaries and news reports from front lines, from battles, and also by sending out press releases and by building a presence on Twitter. And I'll look at each of these briefly throughout my talk. Our report also provides the first quantitative analysis of the group's Twitter output. We did it in a period between December 2011 and April 2012, and I'll look at some of our findings there. So here we have four of what we identified as the main goals of their propaganda. To provide an alternative to the mainstream Western media. This allows them to attract new recruits and also strengthen the resolve of current recruits, and also provides a conduit through which potential recruits as well as current recruits could interact with more senior and respected members of the group. Also take control of the coverage of their actions and decisions. This allows them to refute negative stories from the mainstream media or Western media about their actions, and allows them to provide sort of the responses that they want. It also allows them to project an impression of a professional and structurally organized group. As we shall see during my talk, throughout their propaganda, we see Al-Shabaab referred to wings of the organization, like the press office, the paramedic team, the war statistics department or office. And this is really, I think, an attempt to give this impression that they're more serious. And finally, also to demonstrate that the group remains an effective and united force for carrying out the will of God and implementing Sharia and fighting against the enemies of Islam. I'm going to start with one of their propaganda videos from October 2011. This is presented as a news report from the front line. It's from a battle called the Battle of Denile, as they refer to it, which is a district of Mogadishu. It took place between Al-Shabaab and African Union troops from Burundi. Again, it produced like a news report, and it's presented by a British accented man who's very likely to be Somali or of Somali origins, who hides his face with a scarf all the time. It's a bit of a mystery who he is to anyone with open source access, at least. This also provides a very good example of the kind of output they have made in an effort to control the news about them and their exploits. The sort of three main goals of this video are to refute the allegations that we had seen at the time. The Western media was accurately describing Al-Shabaab's imminent defeat in the area. They were trying to present themselves as about to win. They also tried to claim that African Union forces are the ones committing the atrocities. We see footage of bombed out houses and people suffering. And also to fuel the idea, which is a very powerful narrative, that the West and the African Union are engaged in a concerted war on Islam. And actually, there's footage of one of their spokesmen, Ali Mohammed Raj, holding up a cross and a Bible. I'll show you the picture in a second. That he took from the dead Burundian soldiers, and basically holding it up and saying, "You see, this is a Christian crusade. If you're a Muslim and you're a real Muslim, you're going to come over here and help us fight." This picture is of the British accented reporter, an exclusive journey to the battlefield. He actually is on the front lines here. This is like bullets flying past him as he's talking. The next one is just kind of propaganda. Trucks coming through, apparently people celebrating the arrival of Shabaab troops. And the next one is of the spokesman holding up the cross. It's a little bit blurry. Holding up the cross, he's got the Bible in his other hand, which is not visible. Again, the war in Somalia, as you can see there, the war in Somalia is a decisive battle between Islam and Christianity. So, trying to get that across. Going on to the documentaries that they have been producing. The one I'm going to look at is called Under the Shade of Sharia. These are longer documentary-style films. They follow the same guy with the British accent as he demonstrates how Al-Shabaab, how their implementation of Sharia has improved the situation in Somalia for regular Somalis. The Al-Shabaab troops are basically presented as the saviors of Baidoa, which is the area that this, the city, the town that this documentary concentrates on. It shows footage of bullet-riddled and ruined houses before the apparent liberation of the city, of the town, and then it shows footage of sort of post-Shabaab, where it's new buildings apparently and sort of improved infrastructure. Locals are also interviewed, local shopkeepers, and they claim, apparently not under duress, that the business is booming and that Sharia law has provided them with this kind of security that's required to succeed. This is just another screen grab from that documentary. You can see here that they say at the bottom, HSM stands for Harakat Shabab al-Mujahideen Statistics Office. So again, this is an attempt to provide this image or impression that they've got different wings that are dealing with different things. They're trying to provide stats for how they've improved the area. Finally, on the press releases that they have produced, I haven't seen one for a while, but this is again an attempt to just demonstrate structural cohesion and professionalism. Apparently this media wing is producing these press releases and sending them to Western journalists and researchers who they know are following the subject. This is actually a screen grab from my own inbox. I've received a lot of these press releases from them. Actually, I haven't had one since they really started getting trouble in Somalia, so it could be a sign. They also seem to have a particularly British focus a lot of the time. The one here that I'm showing you is the one about a guy called Bilal al-Birawi. He's a Lebanese origin, but he grew up in London, and he died fighting I think outside Mogadishu. Again, they don't do this for everybody who dies. So they do it for the Westerners, and again, for them, Birawi represents, the ideal Muslim, and they're trying to appeal in that way. Another one that they looked at, which again focuses on the British audience, to me at least, is they looked at the issue of the Abu Qatada extradition. I'm sure all of you are very bored of hearing about that. I know I am. This is again, but they know that this is an issue that British jihadists and British people in general are concerned about. British jihadists present Abu Qatada's situation as an example of the war on Islam, an attempt to shut the real Muslim scholars up. And so again, it shows focus on Britain. And perhaps, though this is only my own idea, it suggests UK presence behind the actual production of these materials. So that's hard to confirm. And then just finally, I'll look at our analysis of Twitter. I never thought I'd be standing up and talking about Twitter, but there you go. In our analysis of this account, we applied, we took 6 months of their output. Actually, James Sheehan did this, I can't take the credit. And he coded every single message between December 2011 and April 2012 and placed them in the following analytical categories. And we tried to discern from that what was the biggest focus. I'm not going to go through all of those. I'll explain some of the bigger ones. You can see there, narrative is one of the most important ones to them, operational capacity and religious authority, and competing voices. I'll explain what those mean. As you can see, the primary aim on Twitter, therefore, is to promote the overarching Shabaab narrative, which places invading East African forces and the transitional federal government of Somalia, who are defined as proxies of the West, as being at war with Islam and Muslims. So they're trying to convey that narrative. Most of their tweets was an attempt to do that. Second most important to them in this 6-month period was the operational capacity. That's basically trying to show that the group is concerned with its messaging, showing that they are wanting to show the perception of a group that has the ability to carry out these operations against foreign entities. And finally, competing voices, that's an attempt to show their media wing, Al-Khatib, as a reliable source of information compared to the other competing media organizations. So in this respect, just to conclude, the Shabaab account does not focus too heavily on the strategic authority issues. Instead, it prefers to offer quick updates on operational capacity, possibly because such messages can resonate with diaspora Muslims more, because they're not military strategists, or they're likely to be sympathetic to the overall aims of the group. And it presents a sort of tangible and simple information that's easy to comprehend, i.e. an attack is taking place, this is the outcome, and this is what they're trying to do on Twitter. And of course, this is where Twitter comes into its own. It allows you to do this very quickly and effectively communicate. And it allows the group to communicate with its primary foreign audience, which is members of the Somali diaspora and English-speaking Muslims. And at that, I will hand over to Shiraz. Thank you.
So while Shiraz takes a lectern, again, because this leads into what Shiraz is going to talk about, I think from the Twitter account, it came across very strongly just by counting the content of the different tweets. So 2 core messages that they are trying to convey to potential recruits, i.e. 1, it's a good idea to fight, that's the narrative, you're defending your brothers and sisters. And secondly, by joining us, you're not joining some sort of rotten group that doesn't know what to do. You're actually joining a competent fighting force. So there's a good reason, and we are the right people to do it with. So that comes across very strongly just by looking at the Twitter feed.
Thank you. With my presentation, I'm going to touch on 4 key points, and that will be the diaspora, the ideas themselves, the dissemination of those ideas, and what the outgrowth, the implications of this Western recruitment strategy has been on Al-Shabaab itself. And it's important from the get-go to say, in terms of looking at the messaging from Al-Shabaab, it is really divided into sort of two very distinct things. You have a kind of ethnic or nationalist outreach, which is very much focused on the Somali diaspora community itself, to whom you can appeal on such terms. And then you have what might be called the more traditional Islamist messaging, which is appealing to more Muslims more generally and in a generic religious terms. Now, the Somali diaspora, although we don't focus on it too heavily, is important to understand in this context. It is of huge significance and importance to Somalia itself. It has very strong connections, and in terms of what it can provide by way of capital, knowledge, expertise, resources, and of course remittances, makes them very popular and a group that is worthy of being targeted in its own right for operators who are in Somalia. And so in that context, it's worth saying this isn't a new phenomenon. When the Islamic Courts Union, which was a precursor to Al-Shabaab, was operating in Somalia, evidence shows, and there are studies out there, which show that Canadians, Brits, Swedes of Somali ethnic origin did go back to Somalia, and they weren't necessarily always influenced by Islamist ideals or Islamist goals. But for all its wrongs, the ICU was able to offer a degree of stability and sort of civil infrastructure for a period, at least within Somalia. And those diaspora communities were quite willing on those grounds to support it. And many went back and set up businesses and began the process of reintroducing normal life. When it comes to Al-Shabaab, then, the bulk of their messaging and material is, of course, to these people. It is not in the English language. So what we're analyzing really is what sits above the waterline. But the lion's share, as I say, remains localized, it's tribal, it's ethnic, and it's designed to appeal on ethno-nationalist terms. And of course, it highlights things like the rivalry with Ethiopia and so on, and appeals to people in those ways. With regards then to specific Islamist messaging that we're seeing in the English language, before getting into the ideas themselves, of course, we've all heard about and we all know and accept that for many people, men in particular, jihad can sometimes just be a reactionary thing. It seems attractive, it seems like it's fun, it seems like something glamorous, and people feel an urgency based on a number of issues that they might feel particularly connected to or passionate about, and as a result they go to that. Now, one of the key people who messages in the English language is Omar Hamami, an American who I'm sure many of you will be familiar with, but we discuss him at length in our report, and there are biographical details there. But of course, he's an American who goes to Somalia, who has no direct links to the country, and becomes established with Al-Shabaab there. And he recognizes this sense of adventure that people have, and he doesn't try and downplay it. In fact, he encourages it, he stokes it up, and he develops a meme. So the idea of, Omar Bakr Muhammad, for example, back in they used to call Muslims in this country who wanted integration chocolate Muslims. He said they melt when the heat is on. And so Omar Hamami has his own idea of starfish Mo, and I'll let you read about it in the report. But Hamami basically says to people, look, if you're feeling this agitation, you want to come, but you don't feel like you're a perfect Muslim yet, you feel like you want to learn more about Islam in all its facets, that shouldn't prevent you from coming. In fact, and it shows his own maturing as a jihadist from when he first got there, that he's now acknowledging there's a long lull between battles. You have a lot of spare time on your hands. These are his words. And so he says, if you come here, not only can you engage in jihad immediately, but you have all this time to go and learn about rituals to do with prayer and fasting and to do all this other kind of stuff that you might want to. And so in fact, this is something he is aware of, acknowledges, and is explicitly seeking to exploit. When it comes to the actual intellectual infrastructure behind this, the key ideas, there are three that stood out as really the most important. The classical idea of the defense of Muslim lands, and the articulation of that in very much an Abdullah Azzam type of tradition. That is, the framing of that, not in the way we saw in Iraq, for example, that the Americans are here and they're evil, let's kick them out, but in a much more classical and scriptural sense that we saw used by the Arab Afghans in the 1980s. And that was an interesting development there in that context. The establishment of a caliphate, again, being the end goal of this mission and the end goal of what Al-Shabaab in theory wants to achieve. And that's having actually quite a unique effect on the group itself, and something I'll touch on at the very end, so I'll leave that for now. And the third idea, again, seems to be linked to Abdullah Azzam's message from the 1980s, which you hardly hear about in the English language anymore. It exists in the Arabic texts, and if you look at jihadist texts from Al-Qaeda in Arabic, they talk about this, but not in English, which is the idea that the Aqidah, the Muslim belief structure, is only valid if it's linked to action. I.e., you can't be a passive Muslim. You can't say, I believe in Islam, I believe in the Quran, but then not pray and not fast and not do these things. They argue that actually that nullifies one's faith, and the faith has to be actively linked to action. And so, in that context, Hamami talks about this, and I was really surprised by that. You were not getting so much of that in English. So he's developing that idea, and of course what they're saying is jihad is an integral part of the faith. Therefore, for you to realize your life as a Muslim, to achieve the full complexity of embracing your faith in its totality, you have to come and fight jihad. And it's an interesting psychological mechanism that Hamami is using in that context. So how do you go then from these three ideas, abstract as they are, to mobilizing people to actually come and join you? Well, there's two ideas that are very prominent that stood out. The idea of the Ummah identity and Hijra. But before I come on to that, I want to show you this video which Peter will pull up. And this is not Hamami you're going to see, but it's a British Muslim with a thick London accent, as you'll hear. And he sort of basically touches on both of these ideas. And this is in a video encouraging people to come and join Shabaab in Somalia.
For us, our chance to fight for our beliefs is the best thing that can happen to us in this world. And the fact that we may be killed in this path is nothing but a glad tiding. I'd like to take this opportunity to wish all the Muslims everywhere Eid Mubarak, and to invite all the Muslims who are living in the lands of disbelief, the lands of oppression, to make hijrah to the land of glory, to the land of izzah, to the lands of jihad.
Now, in the development of these ideas, again, mostly coming from Hamami in his videos, but also in these ones, it's very clear that Hamami himself has been directly influenced by Hizb ut-Tahrir, a group that operates in the West at times to great effect. And that's not something we're imposing on Hamami in saying this, but he himself talks about it. He actually discusses Hizb ut-Tahrir in some of his videos and their literature. He criticizes them because they don't engage in jihad. But what's important is when it comes to looking at the seerah, the life of the Prophet Muhammad, and the lessons that one draws from that, then Hamami is very clear in lifting more or less directly from Hizb ut-Tahrir's intellectual tradition and extrapolating these two ideas. So on the idea of the Ummah identity, well, again, many of you will be aware of it. You'll have heard lots about it since 9/11. Everyone's looked at that and written about it. But of course, the basic idea is that the loyalty, allegiance of a Muslim should be shaped and framed by the fraternity of faith and by religious identity, and not by citizenship or anything like that. And so that's the first basic point in order to get people to identify with Somali Muslims as their brothers and to make them feel the urgency of that cause. And then the second idea, Hijra, well, that comes again from the life of the Prophet Muhammad, where for the first 13 years he lived in Mecca and then moved from Mecca to Medina, was commanded to do so. And that emigration is known as the Hijra. And that emigration was not sort of for financial reasons or for anything other than a very specific religious reasons, as jihadists would interpret it. So for them, the Hijra marks a period of moving from one place to another physically in order for the betterment of Islam and for the Muslim community. And so in this case, they're saying to you, if you're in the West, why are you there? You should come here to the battlegrounds and join us in order to achieve the critical mass needed for Al-Shabaab to realize its goals in the country. So again, there's that pressure being put on Muslims that this is an integral part of your faith and this is a spiritual act that one should engage in. With regards to the dissemination of this, well, Alex spoke a lot, of course, about the primary mechanism, which is the internet and Twitter, which is providing the instant real-time analysis and connection with what's happening. But one of the other things we came across looking through, particularly a lot of the indictments from the United States, is that there's a physical network. More so, I think we can say with confidence in the US than there is in the UK. That's because we don't have quite the same access to indictments here. But clearly what becomes clear from the US cases is that there's a physical network where the more traditional method of disseminating DVDs, of actually raising money in cash, cash in hand, and then transferring it back to Somalia through hawala systems and so on, is actively in place. And I think it's interesting to note that these infrastructures, physical as they are, were able to build up for quite some time because law enforcement was actually just pretty slow in prescribing the group. So it was only banned in the US in 2008 and only in the UK in 2010. So it's relatively recent and gave them a head start, and we're now in the place where we're playing catch-up. The last thing I really want to say is what the implication of all of this has been on the group itself. We looked at the two different ideas of the messaging. You have the ethno-nationalist messaging, and then you have the Islamist messaging. And as those two different things have resonated in their own ways and achieved recruits coming in, this has created a bit of a dilemma within Al-Shabaab about what they should be doing. Because by definition, the Islamists who are coming in, incited by the Islamist message, want to internationalize the jihad. They want to place Al-Shabaab within the remit of the global jihad movement, align it to Al-Qaeda, attack neighbors, and so on. The vast bulk of the group, which is being appealed to through the other messaging, they want to keep the war and the fight confined to Somalia. They are, if you will, Islamo-nationalists. They don't want to really take this battle beyond the borders of their nation state. And so it's interesting to see that. And again, we talk about this at some length in the report that you can look at and digest. But Hamami, for example, is known to have fallen out with the group as a result of some of this. And I thought that was something interesting as a spin-off coming off the back of these two different sorts of messaging. It's achieved a degree of success for them in their ability to bring people in, but now those people are arriving. What's that doing to the internal mechanisms of the group? And I thought that was an interesting point to end on. Thank you.
Thank you. So what I want to do now is just to say a couple more words building on that, because what I thought, because I wasn't one of the authors of the report, I've just read the report and digested the report as Shiraz so helpfully suggested. What I took away from this report is, on the one hand, really this whole stuff about Western media strategy. And what you see here is not only how Al-Shabaab is systematically exploiting the whole spectrum of new media, but how it continues to use traditional media also to disseminate its message. And despite all the talk about new media, internet, etc., we shouldn't forget that these traditional means of dissemination are still used by these organizations. That's the point about Western media strategy. The other, and perhaps wider point, is that all of this shows it's really almost like a metaphor for where the global jihadist movement is right now. It is becoming a sort of global movement, which in itself has a lot of these divisions. So on the one hand, you have people who go to Somalia because they are ethnic Somalis who are fighting for their local nationalist reasons. And you have a lot of appeals also still based on ethnic tribal allegiances. On the other hand, you have a new crop of recruits that are going there for transnational global jihadist reasons. And you find that sort of division and that sort of global nature of the global jihad in not only Al-Shabaab, but I suspect also in other Al-Qaeda affiliate groups. And that may be the pattern for years to come. That was my takeaway from that particular report, and that's why I think it's an excellent report, yet another one produced by ICSR. So thank you to the authors, and